Today is a great topic, a topic of a lot of interest, I think, certainly in South Australia, but economic growth certainly across Australia as well. Our government here has set a goal to lift economic growth in this state, and in doing so make South Australia a more appealing investment, collaboration and migration destination. A vibrant economy is arguably the most important prerequisite for our growing population, for growing our population rather, and we offer an enviable lifestyle. There's no doubt about it, but job opportunities are limited. I was very attracted to coming to South Australia. It's a fantastic lifestyle. But when I first came here, I've got to say, people said to me, "Why are you coming to South Australia for? Are you running away from something?" And I thought, wow, at the time, what a terrible mentality. Because once, as we know in South Australia, we actually have a fantastic state, and we have so much to offer. But our state needs the right mix of talent, and it needs the right mix of technology, quality of life and other dynamics that are critical to our region's long-term success. And so today we've got three very distinguished speakers to talk about the South Australia Growth Agenda. And we're starting with Jim McDowell, Chief Executive, Department of Premier and Cabinet. Sandy Verschoor, our Lord Mayor of Adelaide, she's going to be our next speaker. And finally we'll have Jim Wally, the Chief Entrepreneur of the state. So I'm going to hand over to Jim McDowell in the first instance. Please welcome Jim.
Thank you very much, Noel. So first of all, thanks very much for inviting us here today to talk about what we are going to call growth state, what will be branded as growth state. I'm going to be as factual as I possibly can be, which is something that many of you won't be used to with me, and describe why we did the Joyce Review, what the Joyce Review kind of showed us and by way of a roadmap to adopt, how we're going to do that, and a couple of other ancillary points with regard to Joyce. So not long after I certainly became Chief Executive of the Department of the Premier and Cabinet, we already had a view on the economic development for the state. And why would we do that? And there's kind of really three reasons why you would do that. One, it was clear to everybody of whatever political persuasion that the industrial base in South Australia was rapidly changing, and we couldn't rely upon our traditional heavy manufacturing, automotive manufacturing, and other aspects of the economy that had served us so well for such a long time. So there clearly had to be a change, and some of that was already in process with things like the investments in defence, the setting up of Defence SA, the building of Techport, the winning of defence contracts. We have like 7% of the population and over 30% of the defence economy in the country. So clearly, if you put your mind to doing things and focus, you might get along. Secondly, thirdly, we had experienced for about 10 years, maybe longer, very, very, very low economic growth compared particularly to the eastern seaboard. And if you look at the average growth in Australia, economic growth, GDP growth over the last 10 years approximately, it sits at an average of about 3%. We were sitting at an average of somewhere between 1 and 2%, closer to 1 in most cases. So there was clearly a gap in economic performance in a country where we effectively have most of the same regulations, most of the same business environment. So how could we move that dial to get closer to the average of the economic growth for the rest of the country? And thirdly, it was just time to reset. After such a long time with such industries such as the automotive industry, which has served us for so long, there have been a number of piecemeal activities which had been done, which put us in some direction or other, for example, in defence, but there had been no integrated, holistic look at this. So we went to Stephen Joyce, an economic minister in the Key government for about 10 years in New Zealand, a very successful growth agenda for New Zealand, of which he was the architect. And so we didn't think, given that in terms of population and other things, there's not that much difference between us and New Zealand. He'd be a good, and he was looking for work. So we employed Stephen to do the report, which became known as the Joyce Report. There are now 2 Joyce Reports, which we'll have to be careful about. So he was then engaged by the federal government to do a report on the vet system in Australia and all of Australia. That report's just come out about a month or so ago. But the Joyce Report we are talking about is this one, which is about the economic growth of South Australia. And what he said wasn't really revolutionary, but it was very prescriptive and very descriptive. It didn't leave us with very, very much room for manoeuvre. You were either going to accept this and do it or not. So we decided that, you know, there were 59 recommendations, of which 56 were accepted. 1 was rejected and 2 were partially accepted. And what he set out was a couple of principles. And the first principle was the private sector grows the economy. Government does not grow the economy. The private sector grows the economy. So let's look at those parts of the private sector where you already have comparative advantage, and that would be a really good place to start. So let's go somewhere where you're doing pretty well, or the signs are that you could do pretty well. And we will start to develop industry plans across what turned out to be 9 sectors, 9 industry sectors. And these sector plans belong to industry, really. And you know, not come as a big surprise. So it was defence, space. Space is something where I think we now have a comparative advantage with the Space Agency being here. Agriculture, food and wine, the creative industries, which we're going to have to define a little more closely. High tech, which we're definitely going to have to define a little more closely. Tourism, international education, energy and mining, health and medical. Those are 9 areas where we believe we have comparative advantage. So let's start. You know, if you had 60 priorities, you'd have no priorities. I suspect 9's about the number that we can handle. So you've got 9. What can government do to help? As I said, this private sector grows the economy. Government does not grow the economy. Government enables the growth in the economy. Having spent 40 years in the private sector before I became an accidental public servant, that is an article of faith with me. But government can enable. And what are the 4 things that we believe that government could do? So these are the bits that government own. So in the growth agenda, or growth state as it will be branded, the verticals are owned by industry, those industrial sectors. The horizontals, which are things that can enable growth, can enable our infrastructure, not surprisingly, trade and investment, skills and innovation, land and water use. So those are the 4 areas that Joyce said, if you concentrate your efforts on that, that's likely where you're going to be able to enable the private sector to the greatest possible extent. So, being government, we formed a committee, and then a subcommittee, and then a subcommittee of the subcommittee. And we have developed an infrastructure which will be launched very, very soon, which says, here's the sector plans. Some of the sector plans are really, really mature. Defence is mature, international education is mature, food and agriculture is mature, tourism's mature. Like the person in the advertisement, he was very mature. So all of that is relatively easy to bring together and get a sector plan. We've been consulting with the defence industry for 25 years. Of course, we've got a good idea of what the big primes and their supply chain needs. Same in tourism, same in international education. So they're pretty mature, and we can get on with that quite quickly and look at what and the cross-cutting things we can do to enable that. Others are, health and medical. Health and medical is very, very poorly consulted at the moment. We're going to have to fix that and get on and do it. So don't expect everything to be sort of terribly uniform and parallel. But that's effectively all Joyce was said, pick your industries you're quite good at that match with the global economy, with the growing economy, with the new industries. Figure out what government can do to enable industry, not the other way around, and get on and do that. And finally, on the subject of population, low population growth is a symptom of poor economic performance, not a cause. Right? And it's a really important premise. The reason why we've got low population growth is because we've got low economic growth, not the other way around. So if we can create jobs and the environment for people to come and live here, then we will grow the economy. Now, there are headwinds at the moment. The global economy is definitely softening. You know, we've had a drought. The biggest abattoir in the state shut down, and red meat was a big export industry for us. So there's going to be headwinds, obviously. But you've got to get the trajectory right. The 3% isn't a magic figure. It's the average growth for the country in the last 10 years. That's what it is. It's not some sort of, let's all add it up and it all equals that. That's our aspirational target. That's the target that we want to hit. So that's it. It's a series of verticals, a series of horizontals. Industry does the heavy lifting in increasing the wealth. Government assists by enabling in infrastructure and skills and innovation, in land and water use, and in trade and investment. So that's it. That is the growth. It won't be called the South Australian growth agenda becomes SAGA. So we thought SAGA is probably not a good name. So we've gone for this growth state moniker, which is a bit of a sort of double meaning. We are a growth state in a growth state. So that will be, am I allowed to say that? Yeah, that will be the branding that will be launched at some point in time. And you know, one of the I'm just going to fit. Am I over time?
Yep. You're getting close.
Sorry. So one of the things that's really exciting about this is Lot 14, and I hope Jim's going to talk because he actually lives in Lot 14, which is a really multi-purpose, multi-use, multicultural, absolutely great. I hate the word initiative program that this government is going to facilitate, driven by industry. So I'm terribly sorry for overrunning a bit, but I had to describe Joyce, and I hope what I said was sensible. You may not have been able to understand it for other reasons, but I hope what I said was definitely logical and sensible. So thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to speak from here and turn my head rather than walking. We're each going to do a different style. Jim's doing interpretive dance when he gets to it. So, no pressure. So, first of all, Mani Napudni, welcome, and I also acknowledge that we're on the land of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It was an interesting thing when Jim just said he was an accidental public servant. I'm an accidental politician. I'm still getting used to that title. And as we celebrate 125 years of suffrage in South Australia, I am the third female Lord Mayor in 178 years in the history of the Adelaide City Council, to the point where there is no title to describe the husband of the Lord Mayor. We call him the Lady Mayoress. He calls himself the first bloke. So I'm going to talk about the city, what the city's doing to support the growth and investment in our capital city. This council and this city is not afraid of making bold and city-shaping decisions. And what we're trying to do is set things up from the future. I was talking to Julie just before and I said, I've got 8 new councillors, and we all worked together, many of us during the election, very much about what is the city that we want to see going forward. And those that may have known me from previous incarnations, there's a lot of things that I'm really, really proud of that I've worked in the city that has shaped the city and made it become what it is today. And that is what I well and truly intend to do. We've got a number of really major projects underway. Many of them are hitting the papers concurrently. So the development of 88 O'Connell Street, which is the old Lacornu site in North Adelaide, a blighted site for 29 years. We got our orders. That's make something happen. We will make something happen. And that's actually in train. We're going through that process. We did an international expression of interest, and that'll be a catalyst site for the regeneration of North Adelaide. We've got the Central Market Arcade development. That's not the market, the iconic treasure that nobody's allowed to touch, but the actual 60s arcade that's built next to it. And again, we are looking to commence construction within the next 18 months on that site. And that's really about the development in the heart of the city. Then we've actually looked at the rollout of 10 gigabit Adelaide. And we're also part of the city deal, largely concentrated around Lot 14, and which I think is an incredible and very exciting thing for our city. So these are sort of generational projects for me. I might not be around to see them to their fruition. I don't mean I'm going to die, but I mean that, I just might not be in this position when they all happen. But I am really looking forward to what they do, enabling things in our city. Not afraid also to address some of the challenges of our 21st century, which everybody's aware of, and that is homelessness, which is on everybody's agenda, on all capital cities around the country, about disability, access and inclusion, about reconciliation, and of course climate change and the effects of climate change that, again, every state in Australia is dealing with. Partnerships and collaborations between multiple organisations, all levels of government, you in the room, this is actually going to be the key to our success. We are a city-state, we do collaborate, we punch well above our weight, and those collaborations and those partnerships are essential if we're going to move forward. And the work that I've been doing with the state government, I think, has been exceptional. And I think if that is, even in the first 9 months that I've been Lord Mayor, if that is any demonstration of how we're going to work together moving forward, I think we're in for an extraordinary ride. Primary role of the city, of course, is the roads, rates and rubbish, and we are not taking our eye off the ball. We do look at roads and footpaths, our beautiful green parklands, and of course, our waste management services, and we have to bring that into the 21st century as well. Everybody would have heard of the impacts of China Sword in terms of recycling and all of the things that we're dealing with at the moment, and that with it brings huge opportunity as well for us to take that leadership role as a city and as a state. One of the infrastructures that are defining cities around the world is that leadership in technology. And of course, I mentioned the 10 gigabit city, but Adelaide was also the first city to have a free city Wi-Fi. And we're a Cisco Lighthouse city, and we've been implementing smart technology across the city. The 10 gigabit Adelaide is, of course, a public-private partnership with TPG, and it's rolling out at the moment. We've got the first 400 buildings connected. I think it'll be 700 by the end of the year, and 1,000 by the middle of next year. And in this sort of the industries that we're talking about, whether it's biomed or cybersecurity or defence and space, or the creative industries, and gaming, post-production, film, Adelaide is really primed to capitalise on that. And this has been the reason that we're being told that is some of the reasons, some of the decision making in terms of actually coming into the city and setting up businesses in the city, and we hope that continues. We also are very interested in the data behind decision making, and so we have a platform called investadelaide.com.au, which is basically the economic insights. So it's insights around the city. It is a tool, it is data driven, it's live. It gives you a whole lot of evidence base to make your decisions in terms of people monitoring traffic, what's in your vicinity. And what we're trying to do at the moment is stitch some of this data together. So we've got, urban heat mapping, we've got 3D modelling of not just what's being built, but what's in progress and what's actually been approved. So you can see what the shape of the city is going to be in 5, 6, 7 years' time. You can also see where people are moving through the city, and so there's how we stitch that data together that gives a really incredible view of not just now, but our sort of immediate and medium-term future. And there's other projects that, again, I'm doing in conjunction with the state government so that we look at our access in terms of transport and how people move in and through the city, which is going to be more and more important as the buildings go on. I do actually think of the CBD as being the beating heart. We have a funny rhythm to our city, which I love, but it is a rhythm and it's very tidal. So we get over 310,000 people on a daily basis that come into the city, workers, students, visitors, shoppers, and then they flow out again. So there's only 25,000 residents in the city, but it's this incredible tidal movement, and part of what we've been trying to do is actually capture that, make people look at living in the city in terms of density, higher density living, an option, that they are actually only 5 minutes from work and not an hour in the car, that they have everything at their fingertips, and so that actually also buys into our hospitality and the offering in the city, which again was championed in terms of small bars licences. There's over 100 new small bars and venues, and so the city shape has really changed. Tourism sector, which Jim mentioned, is on a really strong growth trajectory, and as are the things that need to support it. And we've got fabulous heritage, we've got amazing culture, we have a global reputation for arts, for sports, for entertainment, and the city is a destination in its own right. And this is something that I was very keen to, that it's not just a gateway, even though it is, we have some of the most incredible regions and regional experiences in this state. What we want to do is capitalise on the city as a destination in and of its own right. And Noel was correct. It is a lifestyle city, and it has been since its very inception. So those of you may have been aware, we launched a initiative called Adelaide Designed for Life. And that goes back to the very beginning when Colonel William Light designed the city of Adelaide as a city within a park, and it is the first planned city in the world that was planned to be within a park, and it was putting health, happiness, and well-being at the central platform of his plan. And we do think that we know that he was under significant pressure at the time from very powerful people in the new colony to get on with it, but he stayed true to his intent. And we have a city layout that we hope will soon be recognised as the UNESCO World Heritage Place. But between the hills and the sea, those outcomes are the same. And in fact, today it was again announced that The Economist has continued to rank Adelaide in the top 10 livable cities in the world, and as it has been for the last 8 years. I'm hoping to go up that ladder just a little bit in the next little while. But I do think that it's really the essence of who we are. And, for me, I know that we are competing with larger cities, but I don't want to be one. I don't want to be Melbourne and Sydney. I want to be Adelaide, and I want to be authentically Adelaide. And I think we have a very, very rich culture here and a huge amount to offer. And those partnerships that we're going to do, and we are currently with all levels of government, businesses, universities, NGOs, are absolutely vital. And particularly for new opportunities, and not only keeping our young people in the state, but actually bringing in an influx of new visitors and workers. For our city to thrive, we have to be willing to take risks. We have to be bold in our intention, which I believe that, combined, I've seen lots of incredible bold moves happening. And more than anything, I don't think there's been a time I can remember, certainly in the last decade or so, where Adelaide has actually felt so exciting. I do think that we've got huge opportunity, and that is, nurturing a city culture that actually embraces that, with all those new industry sectors, but actually maintaining its connection to the people and being able to listen to what people want and need, and actually what experiences they want to have when they are in our city. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to also acknowledge we're meeting on Kaurna land, and timely. I've just been at a Aboriginal business forum down at the entertainment this morning, and one of the things that really pleased me about that was the number of Aboriginal startups that are out there and entrepreneurial ventures that are out there, which I think is a really, really healthy thing for the Aboriginal community, but also for the state as a whole. And I'll talk a bit more about that as well. I wanted to, tell a couple of stories, and Sandy pointed out that I would take on the interpretive dance routine. Sandy and I worked together on the Adelaide Festival, and she knows I have absolutely no artistic talent whatsoever. But since I have to do something different, and my notes here say fireside chat, I'm going to perch myself on the seat and make sure that the cameraman there doesn't have to follow me back and forwards like a duck on a thing, a bit like McDowell. I'm also going to keep McDowell out of eyesight because I know he's going to try and distract me by pulling funny faces. Rightio. So a couple of things. For many of you, I'm going to repeat a bit of what I've said to you before in other forums, and I'm doing that in the good tradition of advertising. And if I keep saying, eventually it'll become true. We've got a. I want to go back to Jim's comments about strategy, and certainly in the entrepreneurship strategy, we have a real focus on the vast majority of those sectors that Jim talked about, particularly defence, digital, space, creative industries, agtech, biotech and energy. And on Lot 14 in particular, and I'll talk about Lot 14 in the context of the broader entrepreneurial ecosystem in South Australia, a real emphasis on defence, digital, space and creative industries, and Jim used high tech. I'm probably using digital. It is an area that we do need to more clearly define, and certainly with the Lot 14 stuff, I'll chat about that a bit more as well. I tell the story of when I first came to Adelaide, and I'd spent a year in the UK on test pilot school with the Royal Air Force, and for the 3 years prior to that, I had lived in Katherine in the Northern Territory. And when I came to Adelaide, I was not particularly interested in coming to Adelaide. I again, like Noel mentioned, people said, "Well, how are you going to cope there?" And South Australia, and like, what's it got going for it? And I have to say, I am a real convert. I think you all know we are regularly in the best, the most livable cities in the world, the top 10 most livable cities in the world. I think, and I travel a fair bit. I've got in my part-time job, I've got companies all over Europe and Asia, and operations in the US as well. We live in the best small city in the world. We genuinely do. We've got great schools. We've got we've got a vibrant arts culture through things like the Fringe and the Adelaide Festival, WAME Adelaide, and so many other things. We've got beautiful areas, beautiful coastlines. We've got different living styles you can choose. I had a bunch of Americans out here a couple of weeks ago, and I said, look, first of all, you can choose from having a coastal lifestyle. Go and live anywhere along the coast. You can have a bit of a suburban lifestyle with parks and all those places that you can have your 3 or 4 bedroom house with kids and all that sort of stuff, near parks, near waterways that you can row on and do all sorts of things. You can have a very city-based lifestyle in a vibrant city, and you can live up in the hills as I do, and literally be less than 25 minutes to a capital city. Now, again, I boast to my friends in Sydney, and I lived in Sydney for several years, and 2 years ago I sold my 1-bedroom flat in Wallara, and it was a pissy little 1-bedroom flat that you could not swing a cat in, and I sold it for the price of a nice 3 or 4 bedroom house in the eastern suburbs of Adelaide. So that was number one. Number two, I live on several acres of land in the Adelaide Hills, 25 minutes from the middle of the capital city, 25 minutes from my work for the price of a nice apartment in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. So I reckon it is really, really hard to beat what we have here. But equally, I want to back up what Jim McDowell was saying before about the quality of people we get down here and about population growth and all those sorts of things. I want to make sure that the jobs we are creating for future generation are high quality, and they are going to be the jobs of the future, so that our kids and their children are going to have careers in something that is exciting, stimulating, and is going to make them want to stay here and make their families want to stay here. And I think that is absolutely critical to any strategies we embrace in the future. Now, we don't have a lot of big enterprises, or we don't have as many big corporations and enterprises as we do in other cities. And what I like about the entrepreneurship strategy is that instead of people, and I'm talking about the whole cross-section, because when I talk about entrepreneurship, I'm talking about young kids in primary school. I'm talking about your typical master's, PhD out of universities. I'm talking about people that are changing jobs or maybe retiring from an existing job. But I want those people to have really, really interesting and exciting jobs and careers. And because the opportunities don't exist in large corporations, the theme very much I push and government is pushing is, instead of going for a great career in a large corporation and having to move somewhere else, how about you create your ideal job and your ideal career in your own organisation, scale it up and build it, and do it right here in South Australia, where you can have the lifestyle that we all enjoy so much. So the strategy we're embracing for entrepreneurship in the state, and Lot 14 is just a subcomponent, not a sub-component, as McDowell would have us think. of the strategy, but it is very much part of the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem that extends from the way north of the state to sort of south and Mount Gambier, the regions. But certainly Lot 14 will be a very significant focus, but very, very connected to a whole lot of other entrepreneurial precincts and neighbourhoods like Tonsley, like ICC and Whyalla and lots of others all over. And the fixed strategy we've got, and fixed stands for Future Industries Exchange for Entrepreneurs, is based on 4 pillars. And those 4 pillars are basically to inspire, enable, equip, enable and celebrate. The inspire part is very much about getting people interested in entrepreneurship and actually thinking about it as a possible future for themselves and for their kids and, their friends and all those sorts of things. And that is, as I mentioned, everyone from a primary school kid to a retiree, and maybe it's a person that's retired from the Australian Submarine Corporation as a welder and decided they've got a great idea to build barbecues or garden furniture or things like that and export it to the world. And we want to support all those different sorts of entrepreneurship. The equip part is making sure that people with really great ideas and really, really innovative things have the skills they need to run those businesses and commercialise. And this is where I think it's really important to delineate between innovation and entrepreneurship. And in very, very simple terms, in my mind at least, innovation plus commercialisation equals entrepreneurship. So we already do lots of really, really innovative stuff in this state. We have got great universities. We do some of the most innovative stuff in the world in things like the arts. And again, I mentioned Sandy and I worked at the Adelaide Festival, one of the most innovative and cutting-edge festivals in the world, and regularly rated amongst the top 3 or 4 festivals globally. And we do all sorts of great stuff in our universities. And I quote a figure that if you look at Nobel laureates per capita and take South Australia, we would sit somewhere between Switzerland and Sweden in the top 10 in terms of Nobel laureates per capita. So I have no issue at all with the quality of our institutions, with the quality of our innovation and the stuff we do. And I have a global company myself in Nobis Systems. I am more than willing to put any of my technologists up against their peers in the rest of the world. And 40% of my employees are actually born and educated overseas anyway. So I think I've got a pretty reasonable benchmark for that. So we are in a really, really good shape there. But what we are manifestly bad at doing is getting really good commercial outcomes and economic benefit and jobs out of all the great things we do, and that needs to change. And everyone in this room has a part to play in that. So equipping people with the skills to actually turn those innovations and those ideas, whether it's a primary school kid or whether it's a PhD from university in mechanical engineering or biotech or computer science or whatever it is, equipping them with the skills to write business plans, write marketing plans, understand what a profit and loss is, understand what a balance sheet is. The stuff that is bread and butter for many of us here in business is one of the key things we need to do. The other part of the strategy is the enable strategy, and that is making sure that we have a really neutral, and I'm going to use the word positive political environment. So entrepreneurship is not used as a political football. That one side of the politics doesn't say, right, we're going to can people in business and entrepreneurs, that it is seen globally, statewide as contributing to the state and having a positive benefit, and it's seen across politics as doing that. From an economic point of view, making sure that we have funding, making sure that we have venture capital, making sure we have superannuation funds, and it's really pleasing to see several people, and people from Funds SA in particular, who I met with last week, who I know now have that on their agenda, as do many of the super funds in Australia, and I think that's really encouraging. But making sure we have angels, making sure we have banks that will loan to smaller companies, maybe with not as much balance sheet as they'd normally like, and helping them support and grow their businesses. There's an agenda I'm pushing too from the social point of view, entrepreneurs as heroes. and this is a really important one. I'll get back to that with the Celebrate stuff in a sec. The technology is infrastructure. It is Lot 14. It's Tonsley. It's high-speed internet. It's Gig City, SaberNet, all the things that Sandy mentioned before, and we are well advanced. And as Sandy mentioned before, the first city to have free Wi-Fi across the city. It's cyber resilient systems, all those things that an entrepreneurial venture needs to actually go global and do stuff to the world. So logistics trails, all the other things we need. And then there's a legal part of it as well, making sure that we have professionals in the community that know what entrepreneurship is in the legal fraternity, in the accounting fraternity, amongst professional services, and then also making sure that things like government, who in South Australia are the biggest game in town, are smart buyers, and that we have procurement policies that allow small entrepreneurial organisations to go to government and say, I can sort out a problem for you and I can help you be more efficient, more effective, and deliver real benefit to taxpayers, and making sure that the traditional risk aversiveness of government, which is perfectly reasonable, that we compensate for that and find means to allow those organisations to really contribute. I'm going to finish in about 1 minute. I just want to touch briefly on the entrepreneur as a hero. We do have a real issue with the tall poppy syndrome in Australia and South Australia particularly. We have got the great Australian trait, the ability to laugh at the misfortune of others. So when someone has a go and they fall over, we usually walk past and have a giggle, or worse still, give them a kick in the shins. And then have a giggle. And we've got people that do well, and people have heard me use this analogy before, but if you see someone, a business person driving down the street in a Ferrari, you usually assume that they stole it or ripped someone off to get it. I want to change that narrative because I think that is really important. And one of the ways we need to change that narrative is to have a uniquely Australian form of entrepreneurship and South Australian form of entrepreneurship. And that engagement and that strategy and that unique form of entrepreneurship needs to involve the community. It needs to involve sustainability. It needs to involve social entrepreneurship. It needs to involve the Aboriginal community. And it needs to involve a whole lot of people in our community who are less well off and that have a very, very strong place and a really positive role to play in our community. And I want to see that we embed that in our entrepreneurial ecosystem from a start. And the reason that is so important is I think if entrepreneurs and business people in this state engage with the community in a positive way, then the community will support those entrepreneurs and business people in a way that we have not seen before. What that means is, when you start your business and you get to $20 billion, you don't then, and you've screwed a whole lot of people on the way up, you don't then start the Bill Gates Foundation. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. You don't then start a foundation to make up for the behaviour you've displayed in the past. What you do is you embed within your organisation and your business doing the right thing. I really, really think that is important, and I would again ask all of you in the business community to come along for that journey. And part of that journey is also making sure that people that are doing the wrong thing in business are outed by the business community ourselves, and that we do not tolerate that sort of behaviour, and we make people, we get people to do the right thing. I won't talk for much longer. I think we can take questions, but thanks for your time.
I'll start the question session off though, and maybe this question is more directed towards Jim McDowell. And just to set the tone, at the moment, as we know, the global economy is quite unstable. From a South Australian point of view, Jim, I mean, just how adaptable and resilient do you think the South Australian economy is to, be able to deal with what's going on outside?
I mean, and that's a good question, which I'm not going to answer. I think so. There's only one thing I learned this in business. One of the first things I learned when I was running businesses, big or small, the one thing you can control is your own performance.
Yep.
Yeah. So focus on controlling your own performance, and you'll be trained. You know, there's nothing I can do about the Anglo-American trade, about the Chinese-American trade war. There's nothing I can do about a softening global economy. There's nothing I can do about a drought. All I can do is make this thing as good and as resilient as possible, so that it can withstand these things. We're at the beginning of this journey for many of these industries. I would argue the defence thing, for example, is very resilient. Yeah. Single customer, it's government, long-term contracts. It's exactly the sort of resilience you want to build. But, you know, if you don't start, you can't finish. So we're going to start in this journey for a number of these industries. Some of them will be much more resilient than others, and we've got to build as much resilience as we can. But our focus, as it is when you're running a business, is your own performance. That's what you can control, your own performance.
Thanks, Jim. Anybody else like to comment?
I think, just to back up Jim's comment, I think we are actually quite fortunate in the fact that we have things like the defence industry there, and my own business started off in that sector. And the great thing about the defence industry is it's got a pretty low beta ratio for those of you that invest. So the ups and downs of economies, you know, defence projects are like large freight trains, and once they are started, it's really difficult to stop them. So, you know, things like the future frigate, the future submarine, those projects I think will be a really, really good basis of a strong South Australian economy. And the really nice part about them is they also involve high levels of technology and engineering, which I think can be used to then turbocharge many of the other sectors.
Thank you. I've got a question, just one more question, and I'm going to ask the audience to comment. But I spent some time in living in Singapore, running the university's campus up there, and it never ceased to amaze me that, notwithstanding the fact that we'd have two prime ministers who were alumni of the University of Adelaide, that people would still ask, "Where's Adelaide?" They'd know where Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane was, and Perth, and so it's been one of the reasons why I've tried to do things in the university on an international scale. But Sandy, I just wonder, you've been in the job now for only a short period of time, maybe 9 months or so. What plans would you have for trying to get the message out? I know this is probably a state government thing as well. How do we better promote Adelaide, not only on the world side, but also nationally as well?
Well, I think there are actually many industries where we do punch above our weight and we do have global reputations. But one of the things that, you know, I love about Adelaide and Adelaide people is that they are very humble with their success, with the things that they do. We are a city of firsts. I mean, this city has done so many things. You know, you talked about the Nobel laureates, but the things that have come out of Adelaide is extraordinary. But we don't shout it. We don't talk about it. We, you know, go, yeah, that was really good. But it was sort of, you know, so we've got to get loud, basically, which goes against the grain for many, many people, but we've all got to get loud about our successes. We've actually, you know, we've got to acknowledge those people that are having a go. We've got to applaud the successes and celebrate the things that we're doing, and we have to all do it, and it has to be a concerted effort to get that noise, to get some noise out there.
Thanks, Sandy. Jim,
I figure if I keep adding on to this, you won't ask me any hard questions, Noel. Just to go back to Sandy, I think this is a real issue, that we don't tell stories and positive stories. My wife, when I first moved here and my company started to do okay, said, "Oh, you need to be a bit careful." And I said, "Why do I need to be a bit careful?" And she said, "Because you're gonna get a bit too big for your boots, and people want to take pot shots at you." And I just thought, God, that's such a negative sentiment. And it was delivered with, in a very kind, sort of sympathetic way. But what is really interesting is that message is starting to get out nationally. I was at a dinner in New South Wales a couple of weeks ago with a whole lot of quite wealthy people from the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and we're sitting next to this lady who was doing year 12 and was about to go off and do aerospace engineering at Sydney Uni, and she said to me, "Oh, I'm a bit bit sad. And I said, "Oh, why is that?" And she said, "My son has said that he's off to do aerospace engineering because he wants to, get involved in space." And he said, and basically after he's finished engineering in Sydney, he'll be moving to Adelaide. And she said, "Well, why do you need to move to Adelaide?" And she said, "Because if I'm going to be involved in space, Adelaide is the only place I can go." And I thought that was pretty cool from a pretty wealthy family in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, that that was just an expectation of their child that they were coming to Adelaide. So I think things like the Space Agency are giving us a serious national focus, but as importantly, a really serious global focus as well.
So as someone who also lived in Singapore for quite a long time, that's where I lost my accent, in Singapore. And when I look at Singapore in the 50s, Singapore had no natural resources, was a breakaway colony from the Federated Malay States, didn't have its own water supply, had a GDP of practically nothing. In 40 years, it decided it was going to get very good at a small number of things that suited its geographic position, and built a world-class education system, including the vet system, plus the tertiary system, invested in the right end. It became an entrepreneur, which was the easiest thing for it to be because of where it was in the sea lanes. Then decided it could, by having a decent rule of law, compete with Hong Kong and certainly China in financial services in Asia, and grew a fantastic financial services business. Then decided electronic and electronic systems are what it would do next. So it might as well have employed Mr. Joyce, but the Mr. Joyce of Singapore was called Lee Kuan Yew, and he said, "These are the things that we are going to do. These are the things that we're going to get good at, and we get good at them, people are going to notice us." And you want to be careful about being too well known about where you come from, because I come from Belfast, and we rather didn't want our name around the world for quite a long time.
Thanks.
The Lot 14 initiative seems to be very city-centric, and considering it's got a focus on, I guess, defence, cyber and space, and the majority of your defence industry, or the state's defence industry, is based out north, what's the plan or strategy to integrate with precincts such as Technology Park and Edinburgh Park's Osborne, as to grow that industry, but also to benefit the entrepreneur, I guess, ecosystem that you're trying to build at Lot 14?
Yeah, no, sure. It's a good question, and I think it has been a perception. It's been a perception not only associated with things like defence, but others. And I know, to start with, the people involved in Tonsley and advanced manufacturing and all that sort of stuff had similar concerns. Let me be clear. Lot 14 is very much part of a broader ecosystem, and one of the things we're working on at the moment, and we've got several members of Lot 14 management here, as well as the Office of the Chief Entrepreneur, is creating very strong links. And I talk about government and governance and communication. So things like Osborne, things like Port Adelaide, things like Mawson Lakes, things like the Innovation Collaboration Centre at Whyalla, Tonsley. We need to create very, very strong connections. So it just becomes a natural thing that people move back and forwards between those hubs, and wherever at the time of their business cycle or growth is best for them, they move back and retain very, very strong connections.
So I can speak to some virtue on this point, because I moved the headquarters of BAE Systems, the biggest defence company in Australia, from Sydney, from the Alfred Street for the view. I moved it to Edinburgh Parks, not necessarily for the view, I've got to say. So we did and have created in Edinburgh Parks, and Raytheon then came after it, DSTGs. There are just so many natural advantages of clustering of people in that part of Ireland. What we must do is improve the very fast internet and things like that, the infrastructure that I was talking about, and to make sure that the schools are teaching STEM, and to make sure that the universities are producing the right people, and to make sure Mawson Lakes continues as a very strong defence engineering centre. All of that stuff will assure what's happening in the northern part of Adelaide stays there.
If in the process of asset recycling you found something very, very valuable that brought a lot of money in, let's pick a big number and say $5 billion, what would you do with it? Or is the answer that that's not the answer? I'm just sort of curious on, if you had a big amount of money, Where would you go with it, and what would you do with it?
Yeah, look, it sort of doesn't really change the strategy if you've got a big amount of money. You just invest more in what you think's good to invest in. Would be, you know, I don't see. Now we didn't start with that premise, of course. So maybe if you started with a different premise, you'd arrive at a different conclusion. But the conclusions we've arrived at is these are the things that we need to invest in. These are the comparative advantages we need to encourage. So I would be simply doing the same things but much more happily with a bigger capital base.
So there's no temptation for a second airport or a casino or a Barangaroo. There's like the big sort of big big mentality.
Yeah, airport's an infrastructure project. So one of the four things we're speaking about is infrastructure, trade and investment, skills and innovation, land and water use. So airport falls into a couple of those at least. So if that presented itself and said, this is to use a crude term, the bang you're going to get for your buck over a long time, then you might do that. But it's in the infrastructure bucket, in my view.
I think I'd support the previous speaker. The thought in my mind was slightly different, but the same in as much that it seems to me we haven't got a major cause, a major project, $6 billion, whatever you like. And until we get a theme like that, you guys on the stage can work your bums off, but we've got to have doing great things, and I support that. But it is nevertheless workaday stuff when you look at the possibility of a major project. And I think that's got to start from the top. The Singapore example is fine, but you left out Lee Kuan Yew at the top. And he drove it very savagely at some stages, as we know. And I think we've got to be bold, as the Lord Mayor said. We've got to act boldly and do bold things. And I would like to see more. I'd like to see more of that.
Right. Well, I mean, first of all, I did mention Lee Kuan Yew as clearly the driving force behind Singapore. Secondly, you do have to cut your cloth, and putting all your eggs in one particular basket. You know, betting on black or betting on red has never been a really good long-term sustainable tactic in the casino. So you've got what you've got, and you have to build from what you've got. Putting all of your eggs in one I came from a place that bet on John DeLorean, right? We bet the farm on John DeLorean. Big, bold new project, practically bankrupted the place. So when you're in the sort of economic environment we're in, the downside risk is a much more important factor than the upside.
Could I just make the point too? I don't think we are lacking in bold vision, and I think the government's agenda, particularly with Lot 14 and entrepreneurship, you know, there was a pretty easy thing to do down at the old Brass site, and that was to sell it to some developer, take $1 billion or whatever the real estate was worth, probably more, and turn it into apartments and retail stuff. To actually make a conscious decision to turn that into what will arguably be the largest entrepreneurial precinct in the Southern Hemisphere, I actually think was a pretty bold move, and appointing me was probably even bolder.
And sorry, I support that. I actually think that, as I said before, I do think this is an incredibly exciting time to be in Adelaide, and people are watching what we're doing. They're asking what we're doing, and I think there's been some really bold moves, and we've just got to continue to be very loud about what we are doing and why we're doing it, and celebrate the successes as they come along.
We've got time for one last question, and the lady here is going to...
Thank you. Dacia Bennett, Chief Executive Officer of Super SA. Thank you all so much. A fabulous presentation today. But Jim McDowell, as one accidental public servant to another accidental public servant, thank you for articulating the SAGA, the South Australian Growth Agenda, so well. And I actually think governments don't need to be bold. They need to provide a framework for industry to be bold. And thank you for articulating that so well. Just interestingly, I know there's some headwinds for all of us, global investments and all of this, but as one accidental public servant to the other accidental public servant, what are a few of the challenges, your three main challenges that you face, or consistent challenges that you face, to try and provide that change and growth in the framework to deliver? Because, you know, I know with a strategy at Super SA, you know, government sector, you've got a few challenges there. So I'd just like to hear a few of the, if you've got any of those challenges that you'd like to talk about.
You know, we're in a relatively, the economics of the budget are not terribly good at the minute. So, you know, we're going to have to make do with what we've got. We're going to have to be much smarter about how we use them. And there's nothing wrong with having to think like that sometimes. Singapore had to do it for a long time before it got successful. The biggest issue I have, and this is not with the public service, it's with how we think about the economy. We keep thinking about the economy in stovepipes. Keep thinking about living standards are here, and defence industry is here, and population is here, and hospitals are there. This is a wholly integrated picture. You will not attract the population unless you have the right hospitals, the right education system, the right living conditions. You won't do any of that unless you have the right job. So none of this is post hoc ergo propter hoc to bring me back to law school, after that, therefore, because of that. Right? It's all part of an integrated picture. And how do we get a system, particularly in government, how we can make decisions that balances, that says the opportunity cost of doing that is better than the opportunity cost of doing that. And that integration bit is something that we're really not very good at. Big businesses do it very well. Business has an advantage because you've got this thing called the P&L, right? And you look at the P&L, and that tells you whether you're doing well or not. Effectively, you know, there's other bits and pieces, as we know nowadays, but it's really the P&L. You don't have that in these big structures that are set up to be highly federated rather than highly integrated. And my job, one of my jobs, in the teeth of significant headwinds, is to more closely integrate the public bit of our economy. So I'm almost speaking like an economist, which is terrible because that's Mark Duffy. He's the economist.
The only thing I'd say from an entrepreneurial point of view, you know, all those headwinds that investors are seeing at the moment, low interest rates, low bond rates, all those sorts of things, that is opportunity for me, because you in the super industry are now looking for other ways to put other places to put your money, and I hope you're going to put it into some South Australian entrepreneurs. So, you know, I'm a big believer in chaos breeds opportunity, and I think we've got to go on the front foot there. And I also think what Jim is saying, you know, Jim and I come from a defence background. We talk a lot about systems engineering and systems of systems. We need to start to look at the whole economy in South Australia as a system of systems, not a whole lot of isolated pockets.
Probably parting words. These two are doing a great job, I think, in terms of that job creation. We know without the jobs, we're not going to get residential growth. The key for me is that we have a really dynamic city culture to make this the place that people want to live. And so a lot of my focus will be on that culture, and I'm talking capital C culture, so that when people come here, they have the best experience and they have a lifestyle that they never want to give up.
Thank you very much, all three of you. That brings us to a close, ladies and gentlemen, for today's session. South Australia, you know, we have mentioned lifestyle, and that is absolutely fantastic lifestyle here, and there are incredible opportunities. But the other thing that exists here is the incredible talent that we have here in this great state, and we have three examples here of the fantastic talent, the great leadership that we have in this state. And I would ask you to please give them another round of applause.